All right. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the August 2026 read cohort. We've got this meeting's probably going to go extra long. I put in the email it'd probably go 2 hours, but I don't know. It's going to go as long as needed because we got two big subjects. And we had a special request from the Forest Service. And sorry about the mix up with the email. I got too techy and tried to do a button and guess put the wrong link in the button. So thanks for everybody that found it here. And I will fix that for next month. Do you see that some people are saying they signed up and they didn't get the email? It could be it's in the spam. I have found in the last year that these, especially the Forest Service and the bit of DOI, the emails go into spam very quickly if they are from the outside. So check your spam. Otherwise, you can go back into MailChimps and try again. Aren't any huge announcements. There is going to be another resource advisor basic training and an M280 class at Redwoods. I'll get the announcement and put it in the chat. I don't have it off the top of my head. I forgot to pull it up. And then just so people know, there is a lot of chatter about not a lot of calls for resource advisors and whether the spreadsheet for fires looking for resource advisors is actually working or not. The spreadsheet in the read cohort at Google Drive is working. We just have gotten, I think we've only gotten 3 requests to put an announcement up on that spreadsheet. And when we've asked for more information to clarify it, people have not replied back. So we haven't been announcing them. And but I think it's just the weirdness of this fire season. I don't think there's anything nefarious out there because of the changes with the new fire service. I just think it happens to be where those fires are, and some people I've talked to in Eastern Oregon in the BLM are saying the same thing. Like Eastern Oregon BLM has been great over the decades for having a lot of resource advisors that are local and using locals and only bringing in outside people when they, need some time or they're missing a resource specialist. And a lot of those people are, a lot of those fires are happening on private lands too, big ranch lands that don't need resource advisors. ODF from Oregon Department of Forestry, the Washington Department of Forestry don't use resource advisors for those private lands. Like all the stuff in Spokane was all on private lands. So just keep that in mind. Like I could be wrong. There could be some weird things. I know some hearing rumors of GACs that are holding resources back because some states that normally are on fire, like California, are not. And we're wondering when California will hit. And maybe we'll just have a slow year here because Washington and Oregon have taken the brunt of everything. But I could be wrong. There could be things going on. I'm retired. I don't hear everything. I don't want to hear everything. But just, they're slow years, some years. But please, if you have needs, you want to get it out. The read cohort is happy to put it out on the spreadsheet and to the Facebook pages. But we just really have a sort of a bar for the information that we get because we've had a lot of problems in the past of somebody being good-hearted and trying to get the info out and they provide bad info, sort of the way the link to this meeting happened. And it just comes weird. So we try to really make sure we have it dialed down to the correct information, getting it out correctly, and that we're not favoring anybody and that we're using the IROC system. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, so there's a note in the about GACs not accepting name requests. I've heard that rumor too. I think that leads into my some of the GACs have been holding back resources. And it's not just resource advisors, and it's not just name request. It's for engines and crews too. So that I've heard that from a few people. So we'll see. I think that part of that dam I heard did sort of break loose, but some things do happen during the fire season. Well, I think that's it. So we've got two speakers, um, two subjects. So we're going to start off with Lindsey, and I'll let Lindsey introduce herself because I'm terrible at doing that. And then we'll talk about national and historic trails.
Thanks, Lynn. Hey, everyone. Yeah, let me put up my presentation here. Lynn, thanks so much for having me on. So yeah, we're gonna cover technically 3 different types of trails over the next 30 minutes to an hour. So we're going to talk about the National Scenic and Historic Trails. And, oh man, let's see how this clicks through. Here we go. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Lindsey Steinwachs. I'm the Pacific Crest Trail Administrator with the U.S. Forest Service. I work as a trail administrator, I work across all land jurisdictions, across the entirety of the trail from border to border. And I'm a Forest Service employee, but I work with Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, California State Parks, and other entities. I have about 8 years of reef experience, predominantly on the West Coast and working with trails. And I actually just hit my 5 years in the administrator position last month, and I've been working with the PCT for over 10 years in different positions with the Forest Service. So really happy to be here with all of you and represent the National Scenic and Historic Trails community. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about what is the National Trail System, why are National Scenic and Historic Trails important, where are they, what are they, who's responsible for administration and management, and then how can we manage and protect them during fire suppression, and how do we repair them if they should be impacted. So we're going to start with the root of all of this, which is the National Trail System Act. It was signed into law in 1968, the same day as the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, actually. Big day. And there's some key highlights to what the National Trail System Act did. It essentially established what is our system we have today of 32 national scenic and historic trails. And the act was focused on creating and designating extended trails, providing for outstanding recreation opportunities and preserving America's history, cooperation, and consistent management across those jurisdictions for each trail. It requires us to work with partners and volunteers to manage, protect, and operate national scenic historic trails. There is a requirement within the law that every one of these trails needs to have a comprehensive management plan. So there needs to be a plan of like how this trail is going to be, consistently managed across all the many different entities. As well, it establishes a trail right-of-way. So every national scenic and historic trail basically has a line drawn on a map where it says we shall pass through these places to ensure that we are providing for that intended experience. And then there's a clear statement that we need to ensure that we're protecting for what it was designated by Congress. So that's its nature and purposes, and that we need to ensure that all actions that are potentially being proposed or planned along a national scenic trail is not going to substantially interfere with what it was designated for. So that's kind of like a very high level of National Trail System Act. I mean, again, I always kind of relate, this is not, it's just like the Wilderness Act. We designate, Congress signed something under law to say we're going to protect these things in a certain manner. It's one of the few recreational resources that has a law backing it. Okay. Okay, so what exactly is a National Scenic Trail and a historic trail? So a National Scenic Trail is a long distance trail that's designated to provide for a unique opportunity, whether it's hike, ride, bike, through outstanding scenic beauty. National Historic Trail is designated to follow one of the original routes or trails that is significant in our national history. So at the bottom here, we have our 6 national scenic and historic trails that are administered by the Forest Service here. And so why are national scenic and historic trails important? Well, one, for obvious reasons, historic trails, they're showcasing our natural and outstanding cultural heritage, which is really important to be able to provide for interpretive experiences and just really provide that cultural backing to where we are, as well as national scenic trails may also have might also have those resources, but they're really designated for uplifting and, connecting people to public lands and promoting citizen stewardship. The big thing to understand is that all national scenic and historic trails they're traversing many settings. They all have there's an understanding that they're going to pass through and change and have a different experience potentially throughout the lands through which they pass. And so as we talk further in this, it's really important that when we're thinking about, well, we're experiencing national scenic and historic trails in the fire environment, really doing our due diligence to figure out like, what are the conditions and what are we managing for in this section of trail on this piece of ground? As you can see here, these are photos from the Continental Divide and the Pacific Crest Trail. They're varying. Some feel very developed or road walks versus very remote wilderness settings, right? And all of these are valid and great experiences that we're uplifting and we promote on National Scenic Historic Trails, but they're very different. So in fire, we need to understand, well, what is this trail here? What are we looking at? Okay, so this is a map of all of our national scenic and historic trails in our country, just to provide scope and context. They're everywhere. They're all over. They cross the entire country, including Alaska and Hawaii. Okay, so roles and responsibilities of trail administration and management. This is a little bit of explaining like my position. So when a trail is designated under the National Trails System Act, they are designating an administering agency that they feel is going to be responsible for providing for that coordination, guidance, technical assistance, planning, decision-making, kind of for that trail-wide expectations and experience. So, as example, the Pacific Crest Trail, when designated in 1968 is one of the first 2 trails, the Forest Service was named as the administering agency for the Pacific Crest Trail. Thus why I'm a Forest Service employee in my role as a trail administrator. There are many trails, as we're going to see here soon, that are not administered by the Forest Service. They're administered by the Park Service or the Bureau of Land Management. Now, management or managing agency. So as I mentioned, the PCT crosses through many land jurisdictions. I think I see a couple of people on that have the PCT on their, on their forest or park on here. So a managing agency is that local unit responsibility. You're responsible for the maintenance and the planning kind of your local piece of ground of the trail there. But it's working together across the administering agency to provide for what are the expectations for consistent direction so that managing agencies know how to manage their trail on their piece of land. So in this environment, I work really closely with all of the 25 national forests, the 6 national parks, and the 7 BLM units through which the PCT passes as the trail administrator to ensure that local managing units understand how they should manage and protect and maintain the PCT. So Just going to give you a quick overview of which trails are administered by what. So the Forest Service administers 6 National Scenic Historic Trails, which you can see here on the screen. We only administer 1 historic trail, which is the Nez Perce. And then we have the Arizona Continental Divide, Florida Trail, Pacific Crest, and the Pacific Northwest. And we've listed the lead regions, and obviously we know that regions are going away. So that slide will change at some point. So now we're going to talk about historic trails administered by the National Park Service and the BLM. So this is a much longer list. So as you can see, the Park Service administers a ton of historic trails. It is their main bread and butter, as you can see. I'm not going to list all of these, but it's a lot, as you can see. And there is one office that manages, I believe, 11 of these trails together as a staff. So that's to be noted as well. And then they administer the National Scenic Trails, the Appalachian Trail, the North Country, the Ice Age, the Potomac, the Nez Trace, and the New England National Scenic Trails. So why am I telling you this? It's important to know that on your unit, let's say forest or park or within your BLM field office, let's say you have one of these trails passing through, or you're on a fire where it's coming up that one of these trails is, potentially going to be impacting. It's good to know that sometimes you actually might end up coordinating or reaching out to someone in a different agency than that agency that you're on their piece of ground to be talking about kind of those higher level considerations. Okay, so moving on. How to manage and protect National Scenic Trails during a fire. So the number one thing I always recommend is start looking at supporting documentation, management direction, especially if you don't have access to a trail administrator or the local managing recreation officer or heritage program manager if it's a historic trail. Start looking into land management direction, into all of the other information I'm about to go over to see what are expectations here for what is the resource I'm trying to protect. The next thing to do, I always say, is bring awareness to NHSTs. Communicate that management direction to your lead read, to an agency administrator, especially if that resource is being considered for potentially primary holding line or whatnot, and there's concerns about that resource. Reach out to trail administrators. I'm here on this call connecting with all of you. I'm pretty involved in fire as a resource advisor, and some other trail administrators are too. We work across multiple trails. I've worked on the Continental Divide before, mostly work on the PCT, but we do want to support you on fires to protect and manage our trails. The next thing, obviously advocating. Request minimal impacts when reasonable, right? And order up specialized support. So really advocating for trails folks to get into the reef environment. There is a place for you. We need you. There's been a lot of impacts, especially on the West Coast, to trails in the last couple of years. And we need that specialized experience, especially when we're in the repair phase. And then as well as National Historic Trails, ordering up an ARC or specifically working with the ARC to ensure that that site or that route is thought about, is mapped properly to protect for that resource. And then repairing to a high standard, we'll talk about this in more detail, but really thinking about more than just the trail tread and the experience that is intended by these trails. Okay, so where can I look for management direction? So when I gave you that really high level overview of the National Trail System Act, hopefully you don't have to go there, but it's a great place to start and to understand the designation and the importance of these national scenic and historic trails. They're They're the gem of our nation. You know, they are the top-notch, highest-end recreational experience we're trying to provide. So they're important. We want to protect them. The next place to look is the comprehensive plan. So as I mentioned, under the law, it's required that every single trail is to have one of these plans. There's a wealth of knowledge in all of this, and you can glean a lot of great information about how we should be protecting or suggesting repairs or whatnot from comprehensive plans. The next place to look is obviously a local land management plan. If you're not finding information, there should be an interpretation from the comprehensive plan down to that local land piece, that local jurisdiction about how they are protecting for the trail in that area. And then obviously there's forest specific directives or guidelines that might exist within the land management plan or within other things such as wilderness management plans and whatnot. For the PCT, as we'll talk about, we have specific PCT suppression repair guidelines available and whatnot. So there's kind of the high level, and then you can work your way down to more detail. So just for folks' reference, a comprehensive plan normally informs land management plans. And so if you're looking for information in a land management plan and there isn't mention or there isn't detail, you can always refer to a comprehensive management plan to see if there's higher level detail for like the trail-wide management. So yeah, just going into a little bit more about comprehensive plans. They outline, again, they normally describe our right-of-way, where we are going to put the trail. They describe land acquisition, management, development, and intended use for a trail. So the most important thing that we manage is for a nature and purposes statement. So not every national scenic and historic trail obviously have the same purpose, right? What the Trail of Tears was designated for is not the same as, you know, the story of the Over Mountain Victory Historic Trail, right? But also with scenic trails, we were designated to provide for a different experience passing through different geographical areas and features that we wanted to highlight. So obviously the CDT and the PCT are similar, but we pass along different crests and really highlight different features of the US. So looking at a comp plan can be really helpful because there can be general, but also site-specific guidelines to how we should be managing an area, especially if you're looking at wilderness-related management expectations and whatnot. And then there also can be specific call-outs for sites or cultural resources that need to be protected in a certain way. The last thing I'll note is that in recent history, there have been forests that have designated management areas or corridors for national scenic trails. This should be noted that within those now revised land management plans, there are specific callouts for desired conditions in management objectives that should be followed. Specifically for the PCT, we have 3 forests that have management areas, and they do have specific callouts related to fire. So that's great to note, as well as they can mention the scenery integrity objectives or SIOs, and really providing for the like, what is the high visual scenic experience that we're trying to protect. And then within that, there also is for historic trails, you might have specific callouts for historic sites or cultural landscapes and how we should be managing those. And for the BLM, there was an entire new trail-wide policy about doing inventory and monitoring for national scenic and historic trails. That includes the designation of basically inventorying all of the resources within the view shed of a scenic trail, And that also kind of helps to establish a corridor that helps you understand, like, what am I managing for? What am I protecting? So this is a lot of information. We're going to start more talking about the fire side of things. But the big thing I'm trying to get across is that with even historic trails, scenic trails, we're not just managing a trail, like the trail tread. We are managing for a bigger experience, right? This is what Congress intended. And so when we are facing that on a fire, we need to understand that it's not necessarily just about making sure that there's a 24-inch tread put back. We're also trying to ensure that, like, is there any reasonable way that we can help sustain, bring back, preserve this type of view or experience or resource that really is one of a kind, right? So a couple notes as we talk more about fire management is that fires obviously know no boundaries. I've worked on several incidents related to national scenic trails where the fire is obviously burning across multiple forests, and we might have multiple, we might actually have it broken into different like mini incidents and whatnot, and just being really clear that we need to be consistent about repairs and how we're approaching protection of the trails across all boundaries. That's really important, and providing consistent and equitable protection and repair along that. So I think of the PCT as a singular resource, and it's really important to be communicating that it's not to say that, like, oh, well, over here it's fine, but over here we really didn't do as great. We want to be advocating for consistent protection. And the way to achieve that is really coordinating with multiple unit staff. If you have a fire that is spanning multiple jurisdictions, reach out to those local unit staffs and understand what the local conditions are of the trail and how the experience may, or resources of the trail may shift across those different jurisdictions. The other thing to note is that we've designated partner organizations that support the management of our trails. Those folks can be a great resource for technical assistance when we're trying to determine what was the state of the trail before impacts, and what is access look like, what is the best way to get to the trail, all of that, and really discuss other needs if you are talking about repair, if it's been impacted. So I do want to know and specifically call out National Historic Trails. So they're quite different than scenic trails, but they have some similarities sometimes. So they are identified for identify and protect travel routes, obviously, that represent historic significance. They can include remnants, artifacts, but they also are for public use and enjoyment. So a National Historic Trail isn't like a scenic trail in the fact that there's a requirement that it's like this extended continuous path. There can be sections of actual walkable, hikeable trail that is designated as trail. It also can be auto tour routes. It can be interpretive sites. It can just be historic cultural sites that actually aren't developed as an interpretive site or as a trail. And so I find that historic trails could easily certain aspects of historic trails could be missed or confused within the fire environment, because it's not just a trail necessarily that you put on a map. There might be arc sites, there might be critical historic interpretive sites, and then there can be a trail that may have also significant heritage cultural resources along it. So there's multiple things to be considering when we're thinking about protecting a historic trail in the fire landscape. I also want to note this here, as I've been on fires, there have been confusion sometimes about national recreation trails. So national recreation trails, or NRTs, are part of the National Trail System in a broader way. So they are designated under the National Trail System Act, just like National Scenic and Historic Trails, but they are administratively designated. They are not congressionally designated. So in many ways, I see them as they're amazing. They do not have the same requirements of National Scenic and Historic Trails, as we mentioned before, with comprehensive management plans and lots of the like high level protections and expectations. National recreation trails, their purpose is to be providing for like outstanding but recreation, but in a variety of places, right? So we have over 1,300 national recreation trails throughout all 50 states. They can range from a mile up to almost 500 miles. They can cross multiple jurisdictions, but they don't have the same requirements for management like national scenic and historic trails do. So in many ways, on fires, I have heard sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, we have an NRT. What do we do with it? Well, it's a trail, and it's probably one of, I'd say, like the most recreationally popular or significant trails that forest or park might have. So it might not have all of the restrictions or thought process that we're going through for national scenic and historic trails, but there's really good reason to be advocating for proper, if it is impacted, rebuilding of it and whatnot, probably because it's a major economic driver for that local community and well loved by the public. And so to have impacts on it could not only, obviously be bad for the community if it is, let's say, like the #1 attraction for downhill mountain biking. Wow, if that's really impacted by fire suppression, we really want to make sure that gets back so that the community can continue to benefit and enjoy it. But it doesn't necessarily say that there's a bunch of different places you need to look as far as management direction. One thing to note is that certain trails, NRTs, might have plans that you look at. So the Tahoe Rim Trail is a national recreation trail. It does have its own management plan, and it has specific call outs within local land management plans, like on the Lake Tahoe Basin and El Dorado. So it's worth noting that you might want to look when you have those really public facing national recreation trails and just ensuring that there might not be more management background there. So the last thing we'll note until we talk about repair is that motor vehicle use. So national scenic trails and historic trails have national scenic trails have a prohibition on motorized use except for in emergencies. Emergencies are supposed to have regulations by the secretary that really state when we should be using motorized use. So just be cognizant of looking into that. Those, there are specific regulations called out for certain trails. It's not always clear. Obviously advocating for potentially avoiding national scenic and historic trails when potentially dozer use is suggested is something that I always encourage, but there isn't a process like with wilderness. Okay, so one of these trails is impacted. What do we do? As we stated, I always start with looking at management direction. I always pull up supporting trail infra data in the Forest Service. We have infra, so I'm not sure what BLM and Park Service have, but if you have trail standards, understand like what is the trail there? What am I managing for, right? And then if you can't find that information, always reaching out to that local unit to understand from the recreation staff or the heritage PM, what was this resource before a fire, and what do we need to really be advocating to put it back? And then we really have to start talking about like how to best complete repairs. So in regards to a national scenic trail, we're talking about, was it just the tread that was impacted, or was there significant suppression work within the viewshed of the trail? and what type of support are we going to receive within the incident to potentially repair that back to a high standard. And then obviously with National Scenic Historic Trails, there's a lot of passing through designated wilderness. So we're talking about minimum requirement to achieve the highest standard of repair using MIST tactics. And then is there an already approved mechanized motorized equipment approval in place that includes repair? And then in regards to the historic and scenic corridor, thinking about, again, that broader view shed, what can you see from the trail? Like how much impact is visible from the trail, and is there ways to mitigate that in the repair process? Okay, so talking about the corridor or the view shed. So as I've now worked on, oh, I don't know how many fires, working with National Scenic Trails, um, I've tried to develop language that makes it easy to communicate in the fire world about what we're trying to achieve with viewshed and high standard repairs for National Scenic Trails. So when I am looking at impacts to the PCT, when there's been, bulldozers or just handline or whatnot, I'm taking time to stand on the trail, hike it, and what can I see when I'm standing on the trail? And we have to be able to communicate this, right? Not just within our world to the other reefs and specialists that like get it, right? We have to be able to explain the why to the crews we're working with or to the equipment that we're working with. And so I normally take crews or equipment operators onto the trail. I have them stand on the trail and we talk about the repair that we're trying to achieve, especially when we are expecting super high repair standards and visual, like kind of MIST tactics pretty far off the trail and outside of wilderness. And that's when I explain stand on the trail and say, like, well, what can I see from here? And so as a National Scenic Trail, we should be having a high scenic value within the immediate and foreground of the PCT. So that's where anything up to potentially a half mile, I'm having a lot of discussions within not only the Reed group, but within my division that I'm repairing or working with to repair the trail, and trying to explain that it's not just like, okay, the trail 24-inch tread is back. We're done. Okay, no, we want the immediate foreground to be really naturalized and brought back to that experience. And then is there other ways to minimize the visible impacts of suppression, in that immediate foreground, which potentially is that next ridge over from the trail that you're looking at as you're hiking for miles or whatnot. So kind of in summary, generally, I'm talking and using MIST tactics a lot along National Scenic and Historic Trails and Repair, even when um, even when I'm not in wilderness. So like I'm talking a lot about like naturalizing and trying to hide the impacts of humans, even when I'm not in wilderness, just because it really helps to provide that high level scenic experience, closer and sooner after a suppression activity. Okay, so considerations for fire suppression or repair is that management of fuels especially for scenic trails and for some historic sites, if done when advised or monitored by a reef, can actually promote the scenic value of a trail and also could protect a historic resource that might actually be damaged by high fire intensity. So I always look at it potentially silver lining opportunity that if we're in the initial attack phase and they are going to be utilizing one of these trails as a holding feature, trying to be involved and work with them, right? Technically, potentially cutting down trees or managing vegetation, understory will actually improve scenic values, right, of a trail. Obviously, we don't want clear cut, but is there ways to work within kind of like that shaded fuel break sort of concept that we can get to a place where the trail experience is not degraded, it's actually potentially improved, and the trail is actually more sustainable, and not as susceptible to like negative, high fire intensity if they weren't to do all of that clearing. I always advocate for talk to the local unit about what resources are out there. Wrap trail bridges, trail signs, trail markers early. I can't say enough how many times I've been like, I come into an incident like a month after it started, and then we're just figuring out from the local unit that there's like a trail bridge out there that we could have wrapped that's now like right in front of the fire, that if we would have earlier started talking about what was out there, we might have actually been able to protect that resource or to try to do something to mitigate for it. Not to say, again, always health and safety first, but I think there's a lot of places that if we were able to get more connection with local units about those trail resources early, we might actually not lose them in the fire or have a better chance of protecting them. Again, repairs should appear natural when reestablishing the trail prism and viewshed. So match sticking, randomized vegetation along the trail. This is something I struggle with a lot when working with crews. They love things to be orderly, and that is not natural. And so a lot of the work when I'm especially doing trail repair with multiple crews or whatnot is just really coaching them on how to bring ground cover back, but in a way that doesn't end up looking actually very human driven. I don't know. I had this one time where I was like, okay, can you put vegetation along the whole thing? And then along the edges of the trail to like redefine the trail corridor. And then I just ended up with a bunch of sticks that were all like parallel to each other. So sometimes if they're really struggling with this, I actually will tell them to like close their eyes and just like turn and like throw like throw vegetation like next to them. And that really helps break through the like, no, I don't want this to be orderly. I want this to feel random. And that's what makes it feel actually years after, you can't really tell that there was as much human impact there. As well as I always like to tell folks to create these like, I call them trail checks. So sometimes, especially when we have a large bulldozed area and we're trying to reestablish a trail prism and corridor, I will actually have them drag potentially pretty, if it's equipment too, really large trees back across the area, and then I'll have them cut out the section where the trail is going to be. And that creates a very clear, like kind of barrier of like, this is the width of the trail, and it's not just sticks on either side. So if we have concerns that there might be like, expansion or braiding, or it would be hard to follow the trail after repair, I always suggest actually it's a little more work, but actually having a tree across that then you cut out and roll that piece aside, that actually looks really natural to how a trail would be maintained. And years after, it really does appear quite natural. So yeah, if you can see it from the trail, it should be repaired and naturalized. So that's where really advocating, sometimes again with the PCT, it's side hilling a lot of the time. So if there's a dozer line across the way that's quite visible, ensuring that we are really advocating for a high standard of repair if it's within a very immediate view of our scenic trail. Because how depressing would it be if that really obvious dozer line just like totally erodes out and just is this massive eyesore on the landscape. So that's where we really want to be thinking about, again, viewshed. Again, advocating for having ARCs, managing or researching the historic and archaeological resources associated with NHTs, really important. And that's where I think creating that connection between potentially the trail administrator of a National Historic Trail and the ARCs on a fire could be helpful, as well as obviously the local heritage PMs can be quite critical to ensure we're not missing some element or resource of a historic trail. And then obviously installing barriers to prevent motorized use. As we mentioned, motorized use is not allowed. We have a lot of struggles potentially with incursions, and this isn't unique to national scenic or historic trails. It's kind of a problem for all trails, right, after they're impacted, but just ensuring that we're being really thoughtful about how we continue to provide for the intended uses, whether it's designated for hiking, horseback riding, mountain biking, but trying to prevent for motorized use. So general tips that I have come across for not only National Scenic Historic Trails resource advising, but also just for trail resource advising is order up regional trail expertise. We have that within our community, and it's really necessary, especially as I see and have seen really important trails that are, again, loved and critical for the economy of that local community being impacted in the fire. Bring in folks that can support within the suppression, repair, and get as much work done to bring that trail back as possible. The other thing is requesting support from CIDL and GISS to add trail data to field maps. Wow. I've struggled with this on many different events, fires in many different forms where trails are like our trails data is not great always. And so I guess notice when something is missing and find the data to get it added. So all National Scenic and Historic Trail Centerline data is located and hosted on a National Park Service website. Here, it's kind of a little complicated to download it, but it is all there. You also can reach out to a trail administrator and they can get it to you. And then is also for regular trails. I would just suggest doing a little bit of recon and checking all the different trail apps. Sometimes things get really confusing, and especially if a trail is fully bulldozed, you can't tell what was there before. So you need to look into all the different apps to see what were the photos like. What did it look like before? Was it a legal trail? Was it illegal? Was it legal? Was it illegal? How did the community utilize this trail? Because that can be a lot of conversations too for a line officer and agency administrator, that there actually might have been an illegal trail that was very beloved by the community, and we at least want to make them aware of it if we aren't repairing it, because it isn't a trail within our system. There's definitely some conversations that have to happen because that might really upset the community post-fire. So I just always say, like, do your due diligence. If you're going to end up being the trail reef on a fire, look at all the apps. There's many, obviously, Trail Forks, Trail Run Project, Gaia, all those things can be really helpful if you're kind of trying to understand like what was out there. Also, as far as the Forest Service, I always encourage folks to download your trail management objectives and your trail standards out of infra when a trail has been impacted and needs to be repaired, and make sure you're putting that in the reef folder. It's getting integrated into the suppression repair plan, and that it's added into your repair points and field maps. I've seen multiple times where our intent is to put a trail back and then it just gets lost. And then we end up with no trail. And things are, heading in the direction of downsizing, and then we lose our opportunity to do some really great work within the incident. So just really encourage folks to maintain high visibility when a trail needs to be repaired. And then also, obviously, fire season and summer in a lot of places is not necessarily the best time to be doing trail, like tread construction. And so there might be a limit to what you can achieve with repairing a trail in the fire landscape, right? Especially in Southern California, which is where I've done a lot of assignments. The soil is like moon dust. You're not going to be able to really rebuild sustainable water bars in that environment, right? And so I really encourage folks to advocate, get the trail corridor reestablished. And if we can't achieve tread work that's going to be successful during that period, communicating with your lead read, the agency administrator, the need to do more work later, and talking about how do we do that? How do we accomplish that? Is it being able to keep the P code open later? Is it being able to apply for bear and bar funding in the future? Is it potentially disaster funding relief? And that's where just don't say like, oh, well, we reopened the corridor, but there's like the trail isn't really there anymore, but good enough. The trail was there. Rebuilding trail is quite expensive. And these are, again, many of these trails are beloved by the community and important for the economy and tourism. And so it's critical that we are doing our due diligence to document what was there and what needs to be put back. Okay, so just a couple quick examples. So this is from the Dixie Fire, which is now a ways away. This is a couple weeks into my job, but the Pacific Crest Trail was bulldozed for several miles. And by several, I think it was almost 5 within the Bucks Lake Wilderness. Quite difficult to see, and was tasked with the repair of it. So as you can see on the top, they dozed. It wasn't just like on the trail, they were going on and off. There was really a spaghetti bowl in a lot of ways. Obviously, also a lot of vegetation loss, and was tasked with, I think I had 3 hand crews at one point that I was leading, which was really fun. But was, again, worked with them to really describe the view shed and the expectations of just understanding like why we were spending so much time putting this trail back and like how we wanted it to feel really natural. So lots of work there, and this is just some pictures here of the work they're doing. And obviously there wasn't a lot of great vegetation to be pulling from, but doing our absolute best to ensure that we got at least a trail corridor reestablished. I had the opportunity to actually visit the trail years after the Dixie Fire. And I will say it was really spectacular to see the work that we did, and to, obviously the impacts from fire, that's generational. That's always going to be sad, depressing. But to feel like you couldn't really notice man's touch on the land from the repair work we did was really, really, really inspiring to me. I always really encourage folks, if you have the opportunity to go look at the repairs that you suggested and made on a fire, and you get to see them a couple years after, for me, it really helped understand and solidify the work I was doing, to kind of, again, hold that high standard for repair, ground cover, and all of that within the National Scenic and Historic Trails. This is just another example. This is from the Continental Divide last year. They bulldozed a short section of the trail. And this is just an example when talking about scenarios. There was this, you can kind of see in the middle of the screen, there was another bulldozer line that kind of came off of where the trail is. The trail is, as you can kind of see, there's a footpath on the right-hand side. When we talked about it, we talked about ensuring really high ground cover, at least 50% ground cover on not just the corridor of the CDT, but also on that side dozer line because of the visual impacts from the CDT. So afterwards, really trying to do our best to ensure that although there wasn't a steep slope and there wasn't really erosion issues on that little side dozer piece, really wanting to have as much ground cover as possible so that it would look a lot more natural after the fact with users along the trail. And again, we were able to reestablish that trail corridor and reinstall signs so that the experience, although obviously this is an area that is burned many times, the trail was put back, and I think will really renaturalize quite quickly in the following years. The last thing, again, is trail administrators. I'm a trail administrator. I hope that I feel seem or am to many of you. I think I've met some of you on fire assignments. We're approachable. We want to help. This is our jobs. And so if one of our trails is potentially being impacted, like reach out to us. We might have a good contact for you. We might have information for you. We want to help you and support you as you try to do your job on the fire. And so if you are looking for a contact, the Park Service here, this link is the updated POCs for all of the 32 national scenic and historic trails. And then just existing resources. So the PCT and the CDT were the ones right now that I know of that have suppression repair guidelines. There might be others. I will say I'm a little bit in the Forest Service world. So if there are Park Service or BLM resources for other trails, please let me know. I am just supporting, advocating for, and bringing awareness to NHTs, but I am not the all-knowing of everything about all 32 trails. So if you have something like that or know of that, please do share with me. As well, within the Forest Service, we've produced some really great resources on managing for trails after disasters, and this is just general information for all trails. So really encourage folks to look into that, especially when we're thinking about needing to put in funding requests or whatnot for trail work post-disaster. And then there is a cost estimation for trail construction and maintenance. So just really encourage folks to do that. And we're having a lot of discussions right now within the Forest Service about trail impacts generally within fire. Use the PCT and the CDT suppression repair guidelines as a jumping off point. If you don't have something and you have a trail impacted, it's at least an idea of where you can start if you're like, huh, what do I put in a suppression repair plan? Really encourage folks to do that. I know that we're talking about trying to get more information out about that more generally just for trails. So that's what we have there for you. And then just really quickly, adapting to a fire-prone landscape, something that within my program I'm doing to try to kind of change our trajectory is really just being more prepared and shifting like how I manage our trail within this new environment that we're living in. So really updating my trail data and my bridge data. I want to know where stuff is. So when trails are impacted, we have the information of what it was. As well as getting involved, right? I maintain my quals and I try to be responsive on fires as a resource advisor because that's my way of giving back and hopefully minimizing the impacts that then make work later when it's really damaged and the fire is gone. Again, increasing vegetation and fuels management within our corridors. So like working with and planning.
Yes, Wildlife Services, this is Kayla.
Oh,
with that.
Kayla is not muted. Oh, she is now. Great. And then again, advocating for early protection to our resources. Trails are resources, the recreation resources, trail bridges, the trail tread. We should be working to try to protect that as much as possible. It is infrastructure. And then just capturing emergency repair funding, whether it's BAR, BEAR, disaster funding after the fact. Really encourage folks to reach out to trail administrators. If you're like, I think we can get funding, but I don't know how to get it into agreements to get the work done and I'm overwhelmed. A lot of what we do as trail administrators is work in partnerships to do and coordinate all of that trail work. And so if you have BAR money, BEAR money, disaster funding that is coming to your forest specifically for a national scenic historic trail, reach out to your trail administrator. We might be able to bundle those funds into agreements. I do that. I've done it. I'll keep doing it. My job is to support units in getting work done to manage their trails. So building a relationship with your local trail administrator or with your trail administrator on a local forest is a good idea. So yeah, I think that's we've got.
Great, Lindsey.
And I'm at my time, and there's probably not time for questions.
I think we'll carve out a few minutes for questions before we go on to the next one. I do just want to say that we do have a second presentation today. The Forest Service specifically asked if they could come, so for everybody that can stay on, please do. It's really important post-burn the new EA for recovery, and you'll get a whole new presentation on that. So if you got questions, I haven't seen any questions in the chat so far. But if you got questions for Lindsey, let's get those. It's a great presentation.
And I'm always happy to chat offline. If we don't have time, I really want to give the next presentation ample space. So I'm available on Teams, and hope to see folks out resource advising. But yeah, I think the other thing is too, if you don't know who to reach out to, like the Arizona Trail, the CDT, it's being impacted, you can always reach out to me and I will get you connected with the right person.
Yep. And
Great.
order Lindsey. She's great for your read group.
I love to help. But I know a lot of other people that are great trail reefs as well. So I'm definitely, honestly, maybe not the best, but love to be a connecting piece. And Lynn, thank you so much for your support. And I will send you this presentation if you want it. And yeah, thanks for the time.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll post it for people, and we'll
Okay.
post the recording too. There was a
Okay.
question here about falling ops, trails people dealing with falling ops. Leave trees whole or haul them out of view.
Yeah. I think that's a hard question. So obviously, I think this depends on what type of forest you're in, right? Is it creating maybe too much deadfall on the ground? I like to use some trees, obviously, to again define the corridor and whatnot. One thing that I do really when I'm working with crews and they're dropping trees is I tell them make one cut. I have a lot of times where I'm like, can we stop creating like 800 rounds, especially when we're in wilderness? But even outside of wilderness, a trail crew would not make 800 cuts. They're trying to make as little cuts as possible. And that seems more in kind to how we manage trails. So I always am trying to focus on like, how do we make this look like trail work versus this crazy emergency like cutting scenario. So that's where, again, obviously low stumping as much as possible. And then, yeah, within reason. But something else, Jordan, I would state is with falling ops, is that going to also lead to then potential them needing to bring in heavy equipment to haul the vegetation out. And that's where I'm starting to like weigh my options of like, if it's going to lead to a bunch of equipment turning and like being on like our trail or whatnot, is it better to potentially manage for trees just being left and just having kind of that high standard of how they're cutting? But I think it really depends. Sorry, that's not a clear answer.
That is an answer for all of resource advising, right? And fire. It depends. But that's why we're there with our expertise and our questionings. Oh, cool. Thank you very much, Lindsey. We'll move on. And so I see Lorenzo, and he's on. I don't know if Steph left, had to drop off.
She had to drop off, but she left me here.
Hey, Joanne.
Cool. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Lorenzo, and go ahead.
Okay, cool. And I'll let Joanne have the mic first. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Lorenzo. So Stephanie Miller is our project lead for the post-fire recovery EA. She had to jump off for another call, but I'm here. I am Joanne Bax. I'm an ecologist for the Forest Service, but I was the post-fire recovery EA ID team leader. And so I'm looking forward to Lorenzo's presentation. So I will let you introduce yourself and tell them about our project. Thanks, Lorenzo.
Thanks, Joanne. Yes, and I'm Lorenzo Walton, so I'm the National Reforestation Silviculture Specialist with our Future Forest team, and Stephanie is the Assistant Director on that team as well. So we're just going to give a high overview of a recent EA we completed this year, post-fire recovery environmental assessment, and how reads how you collect data in the field could actually be used and leveraged in when the local unit decides to utilize this EA. So several forests are interested in using the EA for post-fire recovery. It covers the NFS lands excluding Alaska and Puerto Rico. So a lot of thoughts that they had was that some of the incident data collected could actually be helpful in their decision-making process when they decide to try to use this EA to shorten that timeline to post-fire recovery. So the ultimate question is, how can read observations help assess for long-term recovery treatments after wildfires? So 3 steps we're going to take you through today. It's just gaining a little bit of awareness of the National Post-Fire Recovery EA, discuss how that current data collections can be used, and then a vision for future planning and data collections, which was a good segue by Lindsey because she had a lot of great thoughts on how we can collect data in the future or just plan out processes in the future. And ultimately understanding how to connect better the flow of information and decrease those recovery timelines. That clip to the right, I actually copied that from a presentation, I think it was by a bear coordinator on these different timelines and funding sources that can actually be the challenge with how much we can do during an incident or immediately after an incident. But if you look at that far right column on restoration, it talks about that 5+ year timeline. With the EA is designed to try to shorten that timeline. And for several reasons, like that 5+ year window can create its own challenges and increase costs, increase complexities if we can't get in there and start that recovery process sooner. So trying to figure out how to integrate in between all of these phases, the read phase, the bear, the bar, and then ultimately the post-fire recovery EA could be really beneficial to restoring these landscapes much quicker and more efficient, and ultimately increase our footprint if we can save on costs from things like site prep, planting 5 years after a fire instead of 2 years after a fire, et cetera. So the purpose and need of the post-fire EA, so mitigate hazards to infrastructure, reduce combustible materials such as trees damaged by fire and woody debris, harvest fire-killed and damaged trees before they lose their value as timber. And that one is key because a lot of times if we can't get in there and harvest and salvage the sites, we ended up spending way more money to do a mechanical site preparation on the site, and if we need to reforest the site, and establish healthy forest conditions after fire, which is that reforestation, revegetation, soil stabilization beyond the immediate emergency repair that most are used to. And then the need for the management actions are to provide appropriate standardization of project design and implementation while providing flexibility to address local conditions as necessary. Understanding that several of these treatments that we do post-fire are very similar across the nation, and that there are just some local variations that we need to account for. And ultimately being more rapid, efficient, and effective response by the local managers to quickly changing post-fire conditions, and then strategic use of limited resources, even more limited now. And for an example, in those moderate high severity fires, if we miss that window to salvage the dead, dying trees, like I said, we end up having to implement more extensive and costly mechanical site prep treatments. So even if we would have did a salvage sale for $10 an acre, that saves us $1,000 an acre on mechanical site prep later on. That can actually be a little bit more intensive to the soils. And if you're in California, that can be upwards of $2,000 an acre. All right. And then the EA has this step-by-step process to kind of flow us through deciding whether you can rely on the EA and then taking the unit all the way to a FUNSI, finding them no significant impact. So in this process, what reads can do is actually, even before step 1, a lot of the incident data helps us determine whether there's going to be some activities or some things to look out for before we even get to step 3, identifying treatment activities on the ground. So including step 3, step 2 talks about integrating that post-fire data, but we also want to try to figure out how to integrate that incident data as best we can to flow into that overlapping assessment. And then, especially in step 4, a lot of things you guys are collecting, like NNIS, erosion issues, that helps us helps the local unit be able to refine their design criteria even more than a general design criteria that we'll talk about that's included in the EA. And I can't see anything in the chat, so if anybody has any questions as I go through this, feel free to pop off mute and just ask, because some of the things I bring up are just for awareness, and then some of them are for current or future discussions to be had. Some things we want to learn more and some things we want you guys to be aware of as well. So within AEAs is a suite of predefined activity cards. These are activities that we see that are pretty common across the post-fire landscapes that people are wanting to implement. And we'll highlight several of these today, but you have the hazardous spheres reduction, mechanical and non-mechanical process-based restoration that actually overlaps with a lot of what Reed's and Bear teams are already doing, reforestation, road maintenance, road reconstruction, no road construction in this, but temporary roads construction and temporary roads removal, timber harvest, and then trail maintenance and reconstruction, going back to Lindsey's topic. And those activities would basically give that description of what the activity would be, the objectives of it, and then what the conditions are on the landscape that can trigger you deciding to use that activity card. So I'm gonna be biased and start with reforestation activity card as an example, and just it'll highlight the potential methods to be used, the equipments to be used. So if you are aware of this as a Reed, or if you're even going out as a Bear team, and you're aware that these type of activities could potentially happen later on after this fire, after the immediate fire recovery process, then maybe it'll hint at you to take it may be lean into different type of notes that you're taking for observations. Like if you see the NNIS and you see it spread and upslope, what could potentially be a log landing, that would be crucial for us to know so we can know how to mitigate those before we do any type of salvage treatments. And then ultimately, before we do any reforestation activity treatments as well, we can implement that as a site prep treatment before we plant. And then, so that's like a current thing that you guys are already doing, collecting for the presence of NNIS. And then some things I think some folks are doing, at least in Region 6, one Reed told me they were doing was like in the future, how easy would it be to collect for like the presence of cones on trees and the high severity fire, so we can determine the potential for natural regeneration in the future. The presence of cones either adjacent to or within that moderate to high severity landscape. That'll help us plan, because once we decide whether we're going to plant versus natural regeneration, we go down 3 different pathways. Planting requires us to coordinate with seed extractory and the nursery to sow those seed and plant for the next year. Natural regeneration may still require treatments, but that could just be a site prep, and then we depend on that seed dispersal. But knowing that ahead of time, which is we have our landscape level data, but some of that field observations is key, and some of that can probably be made during the incident or shortly after the incident. Then another big one in the EA is the timber harvest activity card, trying to, as best as we can, salvage that material off the site, because we have seen these sites that go unsalvaged, and the longer that window is, the harder it is to actually get in there and recover the site. 'Cause you just have a lot of standing snags with the debris. And in the design criteria, we have things that have like snag retention for wildlife, et cetera. But this is another one where identifying those accessible areas, identifying where you might have put where those line is that could eventually be a temp road in the future. And us being able to assess that data could help us plan out and map out some of those areas for a contract map. Even when you identify things that need to be protected, that can translate over to timber contract specs, and then it translate over to a contract map to be symbolized. So even though you protected it during that incident, we want to make sure we ensure we continue to protect that through its entirety as we do follow-up treatments. And we can do that by spelling it out in contract specs or contract map. And then this one I threw in because it has a lot of overlap with what you guys already do with the process-based restoration activities. And it kind of keys in on restoring, looking at it from a whole ecological function, from hydrology, soils, et cetera. And this one, for some regions, it's kind of a new process, but I think it's been around for a little bit and it's becoming more popular, knowing that some areas need to continue to restore over time before we even do reforestation or after we do a harvest or anything like that. Process-based restoration could be a big item for some forests in the future. But identifying those stream crossings and anything that additional that could help with this process, soil erosion. We have soil layers that could identify soil erosion potential, but making that on the ground observation can always complement that. And then with those activity cards, we have the general design criteria that supplement the cards. And a lot of these design criteria are what we expect to be able to apply with all the laws and land management plans of forests. And then it accounts for that's like a similar manner across the agency for implementing things like salvage, reforestation, and related treatments. And then at the local level, they can tailor that. And those field observations are what can help them refine those design criteria and tailor that even more, identifying anything that could be an ESA concern, identifying any type of cultural resource that needs to be highlighted, et cetera. So, and those major groups are some of the things that you guys are already accounted for anyways, like invasive and noxious plants, vegetation management, watershed issues, et cetera. So with the design criteria, taking field observations, taking a little bit more analysis of the area, the local unit area, we identified those mitigation measures and considerations. And this ultimately is trying to get everything towards the checklist, compliance checklist, to get that unit towards complete in the FUNSI. So several items that a READ collects on fires can help with this checklist process, going back to like cultural resource concerns, ESA concerns, additional sensitive species, all of that. And then just ensuring the coordination, like Lindsey said, coordinating with the trail coordinator, knowing where the trails are crossing potential or already existing dozer lines that could be temp roads or existing roads going into a highly impacted area, heavily timbered. Knowing that we would have to protect those trails or that resource or that culture resource. And a lot of that flows right into some of the main elements that you guys do in your repair work, and looking beyond repair work, how some of those symbologies can actually be helpful in leading us towards a little bit more refinement on our field observations at the local unit level, or even at the READ or BEAR team level. So I just highlighted a couple here, like stream crossing and road repair are some things that would be crucial to feed right into analyzing for the ability to use this EA or to getting the local unit to a FUNSI. Land in a log deck, invasive plants, dozer push, and coverts, like knowing where you are to put in the covert so we can make sure we protect that covert and understanding whether that covert was put in, what kind of equipment can it support, you know. And I know a lot of data is this is field maps data on the left, and I know with the reprocess that some of that is still collected in the Venza, especially sensitive data by the ARCs. And so it would be good to know, I guess, in the future, how to best coordinate on pulling out data. I know we can get the incident data later, but like especially with the 214 and how to, if there's anything crucial in the 214 log, like how to best compile that data, knowing that that's not always like an electronic document, that's still done on paper in some places. And making it useful to the local unit that's going to try to be assessing for that longer term recovery process. And we know that a lot of this data transfers over to like the BEAR teams, and that we need to hit it on all sides. We need to be incorporating ourselves with this longer term recovery process into the READ systems, into the BEAR, into the BAR, et cetera, so we can account for that recovery process. And this ultimately hitting at what I was talking about, integrating that field collected data with our current landscape level data. And it could be even vice versa. You guys might figure out that, hey, we have use of a lot of data that could actually be populated on your default field map as you collect. If you were able to collect for additional items in the future, what would you need to collect for those additional items in the future? Like, would you need the TESP data layer to show already occurrences of non-native invasive species? And you may already be doing that, but like understanding some FSVH data and where high dense of timber is on that fire, et cetera. But being able to overlap your field collected data with some of our current landscape level data or just our general database layer helps us make an even better spatial product to analyze even before we go and do additional field assessments. Even understanding, knowing that a lot of the work can be just repair work but extending it beyond even knowing what you repaired and what you improved in the incident, so we can keep up with that as we really re-enter the site and potentially disturb the site again. Oops, I went too fast. And this is just for discussion purpose only on future potential field observations and where it fits in the cycle of information. So we were just brainstorming about different things that we could collect for while the incident is active. Of course, the funding can make it challenging for that, and then the emergency at hand is the most important thing. And some of these things may fall into that read phase. Some of them may be a bear team component, and then that's already been done somewhat at the bar level. But ultimately, trying to figure out how can we assess for more additional information at the ground level, either during the incident or immediately after the incident, with trees per acre assessment. And I noticed that there is actually a timber skill set now on the read roster. I'm not sure if that's been on there, but I noticed it was on there yesterday. But how do we circle back to this flow of information and figure out what all are the actual needs before we even assess the area, and at what phase can we collect those additional needs? And it may ultimately not be at the resource advisory stage, maybe once Bear takes over, but feeding in whatever information you can feed into Bear and then to our team helps keep that flow of information going well. I did not notice silviculture on there, and I know there's a lot of talks about the read rostering system in the Bear team rostering system and how to incorporate more skill sets. Even going back to Lindsey's talk about, I think trails are on both, but what are we missing anything, or is there any overlap that we can assess, like additional things with current skill sets? I saw the timber one showing a screenshot of the rostering system. It's on the read skills, but not on the Bear skills. And maybe that's by design, or should they overlap just like engineering or just like wildlife overlaps? And I think Lynn talked about the Google Drive read roster. I'm not sure if that's completely separate from this. I know this one rostering system was started by Bear first, but it looks like it's trying to incorporate read rostering on here. And
Yeah. So
okay.
the read roster you're showing is just for the Forest Service. It does not incorporate anybody from DOI or any other agency. And the read cohort Google Drive is totally independent of all agencies. It's just volunteer.
Okay, cool. It sounds like they must be trying to get this one similar, because I can toggle on agency and switch it too, but it may not work yet. I haven't tried to see if it's actually functional. But that's good to know. And it would be good to know how the future of that looks like with the Bear read rostering system to make it function, or how easy it would be to even add additional skill sets, not necessarily to read or to Bear, but either or both. Overall, a lot of the skill sets are accounted for. I was actually surprised to see the timber one in there. I was thinking about like silviculture, or you even dive deeper into silviculture like reforestation, which is one of the main things we're focused on after a fire. And that's it. So I'll open it up for questions. I was actually curious if anybody has had any experience or previewed I think it's called Embers system that DOI is doing. It's like a workflow process. I had some notes in here somewhere on it. That actually does collect for, or it looked like it would have the potential to collect for additional information on an active incident. But it's for the National Bear Team, so it could be quick, shortly after the incident. But it's called EMBRS. That workflow seems like it has great potential, but this is their first season using it. So if anybody's had any experience with that or heard of it, I would be curious either now or later offline your thoughts on it. And that is all, folks. Thanks for having me. I'll open up to any Q&A. If you have any more specific questions on the EA in general, Joanne is on. I'll phone a friend. And we do have, I think, John, we do have a webinar next week on the EA that goes deeper into what's all included in the EA.
Yes, but that's specific to the Forest Service.
Yes,
So-
okay.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Jen Gibson, do you want to come on real quick and say anything about the DOI side?
Yeah, just so you all know, the Forest Service manages a bear team that's interagency. Department of Interior, which is managed by the Wildland Fire Service. We manage a separate DOI bear team for DOI lands, but it's also interagency. We have Department of Interior personnel on the team, as well as Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, all sorts of different entities. We do work with the Forest Service bear team together. Our programs are different. We do have separate policy, and we do manage our lands a little differently, but we do try to work together. A good example, there's a fire in Utah where the Forest Service bear team is going to collect soil burn severity on the DOI lands for us, and we share personnel back and forth, but we do have different policy. One of which is that we are not a part of this EA, so Department of Interior lands, we have policy that is not a part of this. So just so you all know, but feel free to reach out. I'm one of the Wildland Fire Service headquarters program leads for the post-fire recovery program. So if you have questions about the Department of Interior or Wildland Fire Service DOI team, let me know. Feel free to reach out. And Lorenzo, if you have questions about Embers, we do use Embers for, we have an online database, but if you have questions, feel free to reach out. I think you did a great job.
Thanks. I will reach out. I have questions.
Thanks.
I don't see any questions except for links, asking for links in the chat. I don't know if anybody else has a question. Oh, Brandy?
I just had some thoughts, and feel free to knock them down or take them for what they are, but reaching out to the READ group as a whole and all of us with our different specialties, I think trying to establish maybe, a group yourself of like timber reads that you can count on, not saying that like we're not all kind of versed at multiple different resource advising, but we do have our specialties. For example, I remember being called to a culvert burning one time on a fire and being asked like how much fill they would need for that when I'm an archaeologist, and like that's not like my specialty, and so it might be difficult for some people to kind of fill out these forms or to fill them out to the quality that you would like. So I know you showed those lists, but I was also thinking that getting this as either like a survey 123 form into the NIFC org and or working with the NIFC admins themselves to create kind of the standardized template, because you are going to be pulling from people from different agencies. And so it can't just really be limited to like the Forest Service AGOL if that's how you're trying to collect that data, whether it's just tabular data or it's actually spatial data as well. So either creating your own group or working with the NIFC admins, like we have all the READ approval apps and we have the CITL approval apps and all those other things in there. And then I was also thinking to reach out to the AA cohort, and just, talk to them about maybe assigning some of those timber reads if you do get kind of that list of like timber reads that you want that know how this process works. We like to try to use the system as it is, but if you have a special need, I'm sure a lot of the AAs are on board. And so having a good list of timber reads, I know timber reads are struggling to get out somewhat because of the um, the cut, that we're trying to get right now from all the different forests. And so they're not allowed to leave to like go on fire to help. And so if you do have a good list and make that known, I think it'll help you in the future. I think a lot of us are willing to help, but it will be, people with different experience and from different agencies. So the quality of your data will really depend on, like the forms that you make, and if you have like maybe people that can mentor in the field on like kind of like what you're looking for.
Yeah, that was great, Brandy. All three, I wrote them all down. One of them we was actually thinking about was that whole establishing our own team, even establishing our own like non-IMT traditional type, almost like a strike team in a sense, to be able to help those local forests assess for what's to come in those type of activities that could be potentially pulled from this EA. So thank you for that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much, Lorenzo and Joanne and Steph, and appreciate you guys reaching out to us and wanting to present to our group. Thanks a lot. Good luck.
Thank you. Next up, present to the AAs, it sounds.
Yes, that's a great place to go.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a great day, a great rest of the fire season. I will say that somebody did put in the chat earlier on, and I put a link or a picture of it. There was a memo from NMAC about prioritization and deprioritizing repair, going to suppression and releasing all resources to go and do suppression and not do repair, not holding resources for repair, and coming back and doing repair later on. So check that out in the link earlier in the chat if you want to look at that. All right, everybody have a great day. Be safe.